What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Guys at Magic. I'm your host, Dave, and today I'm going to be taking you through a deck of the brand new legendary creature, Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. So this was one of the Universes Beyond products that we just recently got, one of the secret layers. If you did end up picking this up and you wanted a little bit of a guide on which direction to go with this legendary creature as far as commander building goes, this is going to be a guide for you. Lara Croft is a green, a blue, and a red, so only 3 mana for her legendary creature, Human Ranger. She's a 3/4 with first strike and reach. She also says that whenever she attacks, exile up to 1 target legendary artifact card or legendary land card from a graveyard and put a discovery counter on it. You may play a card from exile with a discovery counter on it this turn. She also has an ability for raid, in which it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you attack this turn, create a treasure token. So real quick, I do want to go ahead and spend a little bit of time just breaking her down and talking about those 2 abilities. The first one here is saying that whenever she attacks, you're going to exile to 1 target legendary artifact card or legendary land card from a graveyard. I really wanted to emphasize that word A because you actually don't have to target your own stuff. You can actually target things that are going to be found in your opponent's graveyards as well. Now, important to note there is that you do actually still have to be able to produce the color of mana required to cast that, so she doesn't get around that clause, but fortunately for you, her raid ability will help you out there. So this one's stating that at the end of combat on your turn, if you attack this turn, you create a treasure token. So that treasure token has the ability to tap, sack, and then also generate 1 mana of any color. So this will be able to make, say, for example, white or black mana in this deck, in which case this deck would normally be able to do. The other really important thing here being is that that raid says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you attacked, not necessarily just with Lara Croft, but just attacked in general. So that's kind of nice. You'll be able to make sure that you get those treasures in play, help you be able to cast things either from your graveyard or from your opponent's graveyards. Now, with that being said, this deck tech is going to come in. It's around $330. I like to make my deck techs around $350. I feel like that's where, for the most part, they can start to shine and have their own kind of unique little nuances to them without necessarily being super OP or just including like every staple found in the format. The other thing here really being with this deck is that we are going to be focusing primarily on the legendary artifact aspect of things. Legendary lands are fantastic. There's still quite a bit that you can do with this. However, just as full disclosure, there are some legendary lands that are incredibly expensive that I could not justify putting into this deck. If you are looking to build this thing on an unlimited budget, the lands are probably going to be the first thing that you would want to start targeting. With that being said, though, let's go ahead and dive on in. We have 2 Planeswalkers included in this list, the first of which is Duretti, Scrap Savant. This is 3 and a red for our legendary Planeswalker, Duretti. He enters the battlefield with 3 of starting loyalty, and he has 3 abilities. The first of which is a +2 that says discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. The second ability is a -2, allowing you to sacrifice an artifact, and if you do, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And the last ability is a -10. This one stating that you get an emblem with whenever an artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. Duretti is all around just a wonderful engine as far as any kind of artifact deck is considered. Being able to draw and discard is going to help to not only filter our hand, but also be able to make sure that we have some hits in our graveyard that Lara will allow us to then bring back with her ability. Narset, Parter of Veils, is our secondary Planeswalker here. She is 1 and 2 blue for a total of 3 mana. She's a legendary Planeswalker, Narset, and she enters with 5 starting loyalty. She does have a passive ability stapled onto her, and that says that each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. That is actually to be kind of relevant in this deck, you're going to see later on, but we do have a couple ways for us to be able to quickly fill our graveyard, and oftentimes they do involve things like wheel effects. Narset, Parter of Veils in play with a wheel effect can have a huge impact on the overall course of the game and can really help to kind of lock some of your opponents out of this game. She does happen to have an ability at -2 loyalty, and it says that you can look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them, put it into your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So just to help to provide a little bit more of card draw as well as just kind of that selective aspect too. Moving on, we're going to start to talk about some of the creatures. Lara is a commander that does care about treasures, so this first group of creatures is going to be helping to support that theme. The first one here is Academy Manufacturer. This is 3 mana for an artifact creature assembly worker. It is a 1/3 and says if you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create one of each. Lara has the ability to create a treasure token so long as you have attacked, which means that Academy Manufacturer should also be able to start pumping out some food and some clues. Zorn is 2 and a red for a creature elemental. It is a 3/2, and it says if you would create one or more treasure tokens, instead create those treasure tokens plus an additional treasure token. So just a nice little way for us to make sure that we're getting additional treasures. I mean, who doesn't like ramp? Tireless Provisioner is 2 and a green for a creature elf scout. It is a 3/2 and it has landfall. This states that whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token. You get to choose here, but 99% of the time, I make the treasure token. They're just generally more valuable. The next 2 cards are going to punish our opponents a little bit, not necessarily provide a whole lot of treasure production, but help to also just kind of work generally with the way that, well, treasures work. The first of which here being is Hedron Detonator. This is 2 and a red for a creature goblin artificer. It is a 2/3, and it says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Hedron Detonator deals 1 damage to target opponent. It also has an ability in which you may tap it and sacrifice 2 artifacts to exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. This is really powerful in this list. We're going to be able to make sure that we're constantly pinging our opponent. In addition to that, this does also provide us with a little bit of a card advantage, and it gives us an outlet for us to be able to sacrifice maybe some of our legendary artifacts to then be able to recur with our commander. Reckless Fireweaver is 1 and a red for a creature human artificer. It is a 1/3 and says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So pretty similar to Hedron Detonator, this is going to help to ping our opponents down by a little bit. This one does happen to be a little bit better whenever it comes to dealing damage, but doesn't provide the flexibility of the card advantage. Next up, we have Professional Facebreaker. This is 2 and a red for a creature human warrior. It is a 2/3 with menace and says whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. It also has an ability in which you may sacrifice a treasure to exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. The last creature included in this portion of the package is Hellkite Tyrant. This is 4 and 2 red for a total of 6 mana. It is a creature dragon and is a 6/5 with both flying and trample, and it says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. It also says that at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. That should be relatively easy for us to be able to pull off in this list, especially considering this can start to steal our opponent's artifacts, so many of their mana rocks, as well as other utility pieces. We have a single mana dork included in this list, but I did want to make sure we at least went over it, and this is going to be Birds of Paradise. For a single green mana, you get a creature bird. It is a 0/1 with flying, and it can tap to add 1 mana of any color. Yes, our commander is going to produce those treasures, but being able to provide 1 mana of any color doesn't mean that we can start to cast some of our opponent's things a little bit easier, and then also this is going to help to make sure that we can get Lara in play on turn 3 or potentially even turn 2 if we can drop this on turn 1. The next group of creatures is going to help to be able to just kind of sculpt our hand or make sure that we're hitting our key pieces. The first one here is Forgotten Creation. This is a 3 and a blue for a creature zombie horror. It is a 3/3 with Skulk, and it also says that at the beginning of your upkeep, you may discard all of the cards in your hand. If you do, draw that many cards. Now, in a deck like this, that's going to be wonderful for us. We do have a pretty dense amount of legendary artifacts that we'll be able to recur with our commander. So it doesn't really matter if we're pitching a bunch of things into our graveyard. In fact, actually, that can be just providing us with additional card advantage, which can be really powerful. Jace's Archivist is 1 and 2 blue for a creature Vidalcan Wizard. It is a 2/2 that you may pay a blue and tap it, and it says each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. Similar thing that I just mentioned here with Forgotten Creation, it's going to be able to fill up your graveyard, make sure that it's also filling up your hand, and then this one does provide a little bit of disruption for our opponents, and then it also forces them to pitch their hand too, so that can be really powerful. Goblin Engineer is 1 and a red for a creature Goblin Artificer. It is a 1/2 and says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, put that card into your graveyard, and then shuffle your library. Now, normally that's a little bit of a downside. However, in a deck like this, it's all upside because with our commander, we can actually grab that legendary artifact that we just put into our graveyard and we can just cast it. So this is all upside here on that front portion for the tutor. In addition though, this card also has another ability in which we may pay a red, tap it, and sacrifice an artifact to return target artifact card with converted mana cost of 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. This is a way for us to be able to maybe get some of our non-legendary artifacts back, although it is only going to hit some of the smaller things. We also have Joira Weatherlight Captain here. This is 2, a blue, and a red for a legendary creature human artificer. She's a 3/3 and says whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. Keep in mind that legendaries, artifacts, and sagas are all historic, so long as we are keeping up the chain with our artifacts, she will be providing a pretty steady stream of card advantage. Moving on, the rest of our creatures are going to be providing additional utility here. The first couple that I want to talk about are actually all legendary artifact creatures, which is really nice because that means that we can get them back from our graveyard. The first of which being Bosch Iron Golem. He is a massive 8 mana for a legendary artifact creature golem. It's a 6/7 with trample, and it also says that you may pay 3 and a red to sacrifice an artifact. Bosch Iron Golem deals damage equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value to any target. This can be a really neat ability because this does allow us to just kind of like start either killing off our opponent's creatures or directly damaging our opponents with this. This can also be really nice because we have the ability to recur many of our legendary artifacts, so we're not really at much of a negative here. It's just an additional utility piece. Hope of Girapur is 1 single mana for a legendary artifact creature, Thopter. It is a 1/1 with flying, and it says that you may sacrifice it until your next turn. Target player who is dealt combat damage by Hope of Girapur this turn can't cast non-creature spells. This is a great disruption piece. This really limits what our opponents can do. It comes down early, and with our commander in play, we can continue to loop this thing, especially considering that it can sacrifice itself, meaning that if we don't have a target for our commander, we can always just use this ability, pitch this into the graveyard, and then grab it back for additional fun later on down the road. Next up, we have Liberator, Urza's Battle Thopter. This is 3 mana for a legendary artifact creature, Thopter. It is a 1/2 with both flash and flying, and it says that you may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. It also says whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast this spell is greater than Liberator Urza's Battle Thopter's power, put a +1/+1 counter on Liberator. It's a nice beat stick. It will grow over the course of the game, and giving your artifacts flash does provide quite a bit of additional upside. This card is fantastic in any kind of artifact deck. Absolute slam dunk in a build like this. And then the last one of our artifact creatures I'm going to talk about for this package, this is the Reality Chip. This is 1 and a blue for a legendary artifact creature, Equipment Jellyfish. It is a 0/4, and it says you may look at the top card of your library at any time. It also says that as long as the Reality Chip is attached to a creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, and it has a reconfigure of 2 and a blue. That would allow you to attach it to another creature. The Reality Tip just provides additional information, which is always wonderful in a game of Magic. Having access to knowing what's on the top of your library means that you can set up your turns a little bit more effectively, and if you do equip this to your commander, that provides additional upside through that card advantage. This 6th Doctor is our first non-artifact creature that we're going to talk about for our just general utility package. This is 4, a green, and a blue for a legendary creature, Time Lord Doctor. The 6th Doctor is a 3/3 and says whenever you cast a historic spell, copy it, except the copy isn't a legendary. This ability triggers only once each turn. That is a massive amount of upside in a list like this. We've got some pretty nasty legendary artifacts, and being able to cast them, making a copy that is not legendary, provides so much extra value. The 6th Doctor is one of the most powerful cards in this list, and if you are looking to craft a deck like this, I would highly encourage that you include this in your list. Up next here, we have Mirag, Fury of Aquam. This is 4 and 2 red for a legendary creature, Minotaur Warrior. This is a 6/6 and says each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it has attacked this turn. It also has a landfall ability stating that whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there is an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. The reason why this card is included in this list is because our commander has an attack trigger that we really want to be able to make sure we utilize and take advantage of. Being able to take multiple combat steps means Lara Croft is going to be able to do her thing multiple times. Moving forward with additional combat steps, we have Godo Bandit Warlord. This is 5 and a red for a legendary creature human barbarian. Godo is a 3/3 and states that whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an equipment card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. It also says that whenever it attacks for the first time each turn, untap it and all samurai you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Now, yes, Godo does care about those samurai for its additional combat, in which Lara Croft, sadly, she's not a samurai. However, there is a really important reason why Godo is included in this list. We're going to talk about our legendary equipment later on down the road, but for those of you who are familiar with Godo, yes, the very famous combo is included in this list, and it is one of the ways you can go about winning. Up next, we do have Eternal Witness. This is 1 and 2 green for a creature human shaman. It is a 2/1. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. This can grab any card, so if we do happen to maybe wheel one of our important non-artifact creatures, or maybe a land that we want to have access to, Eternal Witness is going to be wonderful here. She'll be able to grab whatever that key piece is and be able to put it back into our hand. And then the last card here, as far as just general utility, this one's going to be Urza, Lord High Artificer. Urza is 2 and 2 blue for a total of 4 mana. He's a legendary creature human artificer and a 1/4. He also says that whenever he enters the battlefield, you'll create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with. This creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. He has another ability in which you may tap an untapped artifact you control to add a blue mana. And lastly, another ability in which you may pay 5, shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until the end of your turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. Urza provides a massive amount of value here, not only providing you with a beater, but this also lets all of our treasures just tap for a blue without having to be sacrificed, or any of our artifacts for that matter being able to just start producing mana. This is going to have us just skyrocket our overall mana production, and then that last ability stapled onto Urza is just icing on the cake. Being able to potentially cast things without paying their mana cost, even if we do have to sink 5 into it initially, is a really powerful ability. Moving forward, we're going to talk about some of our instants and sorceries included in this list. The first 2 cards that I'm going to talk about are going to be the board wipes we have included in this. The first of which here is Blasphemous Act. This is 8 and a red for a total of 9 mana. It is a sorcery and says that it costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. It also says that it deals 13 damage to each creature. Blasphemous Act normally is relatively cheap and deals enough damage to be able to clean up the board, so I do love this card. If you watched any of our deck techs, this is probably my go-to board wipe in any deck that is going to be containing red. Very similarly, we have the kind of smaller, not quite as good version of Blasphemous Act, but it'll do the job as well, and that's going to be Chain Reaction. This card is 2 and 2 red for a sorcery. It says it deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. So Chain Reaction should hopefully still be able to kill everything that is in play, but just keep in mind, the amount of damage that this is going to deal will vary quite a bit, so do the math. Count your opponent's creatures first. Make sure that you actually have enough things in play to make sure everything dies. Our next group of instants or sorceries is going to be all about filtering our hand and making sure that we're packing our graveyard, potentially even our opponent's graveyards, with some fun toys. The first card here that I have is Burning Inquiry. This is a single red mana for a sorcery, and it says each player draws 3 cards, then discards 3 cards at random. There is nothing more enjoyable in a game of Commander than casting a Burning Inquiry on turn 1 and watching as all of your opponents simply groan as their Soul Ring and their lands get pitched to their graveyard. Real talk though, Burning Inquiry can be a really powerful card. It does have the ability to just kind of like force a mulligan upon both yourself and your opponents, so do keep in mind. However, this is a deck that does care about having a graveyard. Ultimately, Burning Inquiry, it might hurt us from time to time, but it's a very fun card and it's highly, highly disruptive. Up next, we are playing a red deck, so I absolutely have to include this card, and that is Faithless Looting. For a single red mana, we have a sorcery that says draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and it has a flashback of 2 and a red. Best red card in all of Magic. You're not going to be able to convince me otherwise, but you can try in the comments below. We have Thrill of Possibility. This is 1 and a red for an instant. It says, as an additional cost to cast a spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. And then the next two cards that we have are both wheel effects. The first one here is Wheel of Misfortune. This is 2 and a red for a sorcery. It says each player secretly chooses a number of 0 or greater. Then all players reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number to each player who chose that number, and each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. You want to be in the pile that is just going to be pitching your hand, filling that graveyard. And some of your opponents are going to be in there too, so that's going to be really nice to make sure that Lara has a couple of targets. Windfall is the second card that I alluded to earlier. This is 2 and a blue for a total of 3 mana. It is a sorcery, and it says each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So this is going to be able to make sure that you're refilling your hand, and if you were a little bit low, but one of your opponents was maybe a little bit high, you'll be able to draw up. So instead of maybe only starting out with, like, I don't know, say discarding 3 cards, you might be able to draw into like 7, depending on what your opponents are doing. Also, super important to note, one of the big reasons why I included the Narset Planeswalker from earlier is because Wheel of Misfortune, Windfall, and Burning Inquiry all work wonderfully with Narset in play. Narset will prevent your opponents from drawing those additional cards, which means they're only going to have the discard aspect of these 3. We do have 3 cards included in this list dedicated purely for the form of going to go find us a couple of lands. The first of which here is Nature's Lore. This is 1 and a green for a sorcery. It says search your library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Very similarly, we have 3 visits coming in at 1 and a green. It's a sorcery that says search your library for a forest card, put the card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. And then lastly, we have Rampant Growth. 1 and a green for a sorcery that says search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So all 3 of these are going to be able to make sure that we are going to start ramping as far as our overall mana package is concerned. Going to go grab a couple additional lands with these. Super important to note, though, 3 visits and Nature's Lore specifically grab forests, but that's going to be okay. Just wait till the land package and you'll find out why. As far as our instants and sorceries that are going to care about interacting with our opponents, the first card that we're going to talk about is Vandalblast. For a single red mana, you got a sorcery that says destroy target artifact you don't control, but if your opponents have multiple things you want to get rid of, it does have an overload of 4 and a red, meaning that you can cast that for its overload cost, and if you do, you actually destroy all artifacts you don't control. So it kind of turns into like a pseudo one-sided-ish board wipe. You're going to be able to help to clean up your opponents, make sure that you take them off of all of those mana rocks, and potentially even knock out some of their legendary artifacts as well. Beast Within is one of our single target removal spells in this list. It is 2 and a green for an instant that says destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. We also have Pongify for a single blue mana, which is an instant. It says destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated, and that creature's controller puts a 3/3 green ape creature token into play. Rapid Hybridization is a single blue mana for an instant that says destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated, and that creature's controller creates a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token. We also have Counterspell coming out of 2 blue, which is an instant that simply says counter target spell, and Negate as 1 and a blue for an instant that says counter target non-creature spell. All of these are going to be ways for us to make sure that we are interacting with our opponents, that we are making sure that their board wipes, that we are going to make sure that their board states don't get out of control, and that we're going to be keeping them off of some of their key pieces. Moving forward, we're going to talk about some of the stuff that I know that you're most excited for, and that's going to be actually the artifact package. Before we dive in with the real juicy stuff, I do want to go ahead and cover the mana rocks that we're going to be including, because this deck does have a couple. The first of which being, this is going to include a Soul Ring. For a 1 mana, you get an artifact that can tap to add 2 colorless. We've also got Fellwar Stone in here, 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls can produce. Fellwar Stone actually going to be pulling a lot of weight in this list, because if our opponent is playing a white or a black deck and maybe happens to have a legendary artifact that is one of those colors, Fellwar Stone will allow us to produce mana that we can then use to cast their things from their graveyards with Lara Croft. So Fellwar Stone actually really important in this list. Arcane Signet is 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. And then we are also going to be including all 3 of our talismans for this color combination. We have Talisman of Creativity, Talisman of Curiosity, and Talisman of Impulse. The way that these cards work is they are all 2-mana artifacts. They all have the ability to tap to add a colorless to your mana pool, and they also all have the ability to tap for one of 2 different colors, but if you do, it'll deal 1 damage to you. I love these cards. I love the talismans. I include them in pretty much every single deck that I can get away with. The reason why is because you can use them immediately, unlike some of the signets or some of the other 2-mana rocks that I know that are very popular in EDH. The 1 damage isn't really going to be that much of a big deal for the most part. I've noticed that talismans generally hurt you maybe once or twice over the course of an entire game, in which 1 or 2 life probably not going to mean the difference for you between winning and losing. The last 2-mana rock that we have here, this is going to be Thought Vessel. For 2 mana, you get an artifact that says you have no maximum hand size, and you may tap it to add a colorless mana. Chances are you're probably not going to be drawing a massive amount with this deck that you actually need that no maximum hand size. The additional utility there is nice, but I just love 2-mana rocks that are going to be able to tap right away, and Thought Vessel does exactly that. Now, as far as the fun package, and this is what I know all of you are watching this video for, let's go ahead and dive in. So this next group are all legendary artifacts. These are going to be legendary artifacts that are going to allow us to progress through the course of the game. They're going to be legendary artifacts that we are going to be able to reanimate with Lara Croft, that we're going to be able to do some silly shenanigans with, and we're going to go ahead and start off with Bident of Thassa. This is 2 and 2 blue for a total of 4 mana. It is a legendary enchantment artifact. It says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. It also has an ability in which you may pay 1 and a blue and tap it, and creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. This card is so powerful because we do have a commander that is focused around combat. We have the ability to kind of like semi-goad our opponent, so making sure that they don't have any blockers left open, so long as we are using the 2 mana on Bident of Thassa. And then lastly there, whenever we are going to be able to deal combat damage to a player drawing a card, that card advantage is super important. The next card we have here is Blackblade Reforged. For 2 mana, you get a legendary artifact equipment. It says that the equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control, and you can equip it to a legendary creature for just 3 mana. Now, you can equip to any other creature that is not legendary for a whopping 7 mana, so do keep in mind you probably want to target some of your legendary creatures to equip this with. And why not just start off with good old Lara Croft herself? She already has First Strike, so being able to buff that up is pretty powerful. We have Embercleave here. This is 4 and 2 red for a legendary artifact equipment. It has Flash, and it says that this spell costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature you control. It also says that whenever it enters the battlefield, you attach it to target creature you control, and the equipped creature gets +1/+1, has Double Strike, and Trample. In the case that you need to, it also has the equip cost of 3. Embercleave is going to make sure that our commander is pushing through, providing that critical commander damage, and hoping to seal out one of our opponents. Hammer of Nazan is 4 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. It says whenever it or another equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach that equipment to target creature you control. It also says the equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has Indestructible. Lastly, it has an equip cost of 4. This is going to make sure that our commander sticks around, is able to survive, and keep attacking, which is going to be critically important for a deck like this. We do have Helm of the Host in this list as well. This is 4 mana for our legendary artifact equipment. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that is a copy of the equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary. That token gains haste, and you may equip it for 5. Now, yes, you can use this on your commander, and it actually is still totally fine for us to be able to do that. Part of the reason why this card is included in this list, though, is not only is it really good with Lara, it's even better with Godo. And in fact, Godo, if you do cast it, can go grab Helm of the Host. He tutors for an equipment card, so if you do happen to go down that route, equipping Helm of the Host onto Godo Bandit Warlord will give you an infinite amount of combat steps. So Lara is going to be able to trigger her an infinite number of times, and your opponents are going to have an infinite number of samurai bearing down on them. Generally speaking, people don't tend to survive that. Up next, we do have Hilda's Crown of Winter. This is 3 mana for a legendary artifact. You can pay 1, tap it, and tap target creature. It says that this ability costs 1 less to activate during your turn. It also has another ability in which you may pay 3, sacrifice it, and draw a card for each tapped creature your opponents control. I love the fact that this is card draw stapled onto a legendary artifact that has the ability to sacrifice itself. This means that not only are we going to be able to have a viable target for an artifact in our graveyard, but this is going to be providing us with a massive amount of just general card advantage, and this helps us to also tap down some of our opponent's blockers, guaranteeing that Lara will be able to get in and make sure that she has a safe attack opportunity. If you really want to be mean, we're also including Mindslaver in this list. This is 6 mana for a legendary artifact in which you may pay 4, tap it, and sacrifice it. And it says you control target player's next turn. So just to go ahead and clarify there in the parentheses on this card, it says that you see all cards that player could see and make all decisions for the player. He or she doesn't lose life because of mana burn. That last little piece there is irrelevant because that's no longer part of the game. But Mindslaver is a super powerful effect. You're basically stealing one of your opponents. You're going to be able to control them. You're going to be able to use all their kill spells on your other opponents, be able to attack in a way that is non-profitable for them. It causes a massive amount of damage, and the fact that you sacrifice Mindslaver is so powerful in this list because that means Lara can just grab it, put it back into play so long as you can cast it, and if you do happen to have that extra 4 mana up on top of it, you could potentially Mindslaver an additional person, possibly even 2 people per turn cycle. So Mindslaver is a really powerful card. If you do manage to start looping this, you're probably just taking one of your opponents just out of the game. Mithril Coat is 3 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. It has flash and indestructible. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, attach it to target legendary creature you control. The equipped creature has indestructible, and it has an equip cost of 3. Once again, this provides protection for Lara. I think that this card is just really, really impactful, and I love the fact that this itself also having both flash and indestructible. Sword of the Animist is 2 mana for a legendary artifact equipment, stating that the equipped creature gets +1/+1. Also states that whenever the equipped creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. It's got an equip cost of just 2. We also have Bow of Nylea or the Grim Whisper, depending on if you actually picked up the Lara Croft Secret Lair. So this card is 1 and 2 green for a legendary enchantment artifact. It states that the attacking creatures you control have Death Touch, and it also says that you may pay 1 and a green, tap it, and choose 1. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That Bow of Nylea deals 2 damage to a target creature with flying. You gain 3 life, or you put up to 4 target cards from your graveyard on the bottom of your library in any order. I love every single aspect about this card. All of these modes work really well with our commander, which obviously, I mean, I figure that's probably why they chose this as one of the Secret Lair cards. So slam dunk there for Wizard of the Coast. Highly synergistic. Love that. Continuing with this package, the One Ring has indestructible and says whenever it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. It also says at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring, and you may tap it, put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. Very powerful effect here. This is going to provide you with some continuous card advantage over the course of the game, and if you do notice maybe those burden counters are starting to stack up a little bit too much, there are some ways for us to be able to sacrifice artifacts in our build and then just reanimate this thing later on down the road, taking advantage of that protection ability, and then also taking advantage of the fact that then you can start tapping it with fewer burden counters on it. You kind of reset them. We have the Reaver Cleaver. This is 2 and a red for a legendary artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, create that many treasure tokens. It's got an equip cost of 3. We love treasures, and this provides a ton. Lastly, as far as our legendary artifact package goes, we have Shadow Spear or Totex Spear, once again depending on whether or not you picked up that Universes Beyond product. This is a single mana for a legendary artifact equipment. It says that the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. It also has an ability in which you may pay 1, and it says permanents your opponent's control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. It's got an equip cost of 2. So nice little effect there. Works really well with our commander because our commander is so combat focused. And once again, just kind of, I love the alternative artwork for this card as well. So it's right in another slam dunk from Wizards. We do have a single other artifact equipment in this list that I do want to mention. Sadly, this one is not legendary, so I didn't group it with the rest of them, but this is Swiftfoot Boots. This is 2 mana for an artifact equipment, and it says the equipped creature has both hexproof and haste, and it has an equip cost of just 1. Our commander is relatively cheap, so hopefully we won't need Swiftfoot Boots to be able to like get our commander into combat really quick. But hexproof is always a wonderful thing for us to be able to provide. It helps to make sure that our commander would stay around, and at least making sure that it's more difficult for our opponents to interact with. We have one more artifact that I do want to talk about. It doesn't fit into any of the other categories, but I think that this one is really important, and that it is Expedition Map. For 1 mana, you get an artifact in which you may pay to tap it, sacrifice Expedition Map, search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. This allows you to search your library for any land, not just a basic. So Expedition Map, 9 out of 10 times you're going to want to be able to use this to go grab one of our high utility lands, one of our high value utility lands. We do have 3 enchantments included in this list, the first of which is Mechanized Production. This is 2 and 2 blue for a total of 4 mana. It is an enchantment aura, and it says enchant artifact you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that is a copy of the enchanted artifact. Then if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, you win the game. So this is a really powerful effect. Sadly, this doesn't get around the legend rule, which means for a lot of our artifacts, you're not going to be able to just start making duplicates of them. But Mechanized Production does mean that if you equip this to a treasure, you can start to produce duplicates of treasures, and getting to 8 treasures is relatively easy. This could potentially act as a backup win condition. Reign of Riches is 3 and 2 red for a total of 5 mana. It is an enchantment that says whenever it enters a battlefield, you create 2 treasure tokens, and it also says the first spell you cast each turn that mana from a treasure was spent to cast has Cascade. We love being able to cast free spells. We love being rewarded for something that our deck is already really doing, and playing around with treasure just to be able to cast some free spells is such a powerful effect. Reign of Riches is a slam dunk of a card. It is a massive value engine, and our opponents are going to have to deal with it pretty much ASAP if they want us to not run away with the game. The last enchantment here is Search for Azcanta. This is 1 and a blue for a legendary enchantment, and it says, at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put it into the graveyard. Then, if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Search for Azcanta. If you do happen to transform this card, it transforms into Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin. This is a legendary land that you can tap to add a blue mana to your mana pool. You can also pay 2 and a blue to tap it and look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Once again, I do have this card included in part because it is part of that secret layer of the Universes Beyond product, in which you would have gotten Lara Croft to begin with. It does have an alternative name of Heart of the Explorer for that, but I mean, it's awesome. It's a fantastic card with great artwork. All right, moving forward, we're going to talk about the mana base. Now, if you haven't already done so and you haven't pieced this together yet, a lot of this deck was already spent on some of our equipment. Those legendary artifact equipments, they can be kind of expensive as far as like real dollar value goes. So sadly, we don't have a ton of a budget for us to work with whenever it comes to the mana base. But we do still have a functional mana base. It's just not perfect. So if you are looking to include a little bit more of a budget for this, the mana base, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, is really where I would start to attack, especially with some of the really powerful utility lands. The first card we're going to talk about, though, is Command Tower. This is a land that you can tap to add 1 color of any color of your commander's color identity. We have Exotic Orchard. That is a land that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. That's actually really important in this list. Once again, I already talked about why whenever it came to like Fellwar Stone. Frontier Bivouac is a land, and it says that it enters the battlefield tapped. Later on, of course, you can tap it for either a green, a blue, or a red. So hopefully you can just drop this whenever you don't need access to the mana. And we also have Ketria Triome. This is a land that is a forest, island, and mountain, making it easy for us to go fetch. You can tap it for a green, a blue, or a red. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it has a cycling ability in which you can pay 3 to discard it and draw a card. We have 3 utility lands. Each of these are legendary lands that I figured were really important in this list. The first of which is Gaia Reach Sanitarium. This is a legendary land that can tap for a colorless, or you can pay 2, tap it, and it says each player draws a card, then discards a card. This allows you to filter your hand, being able to pitch something that is still relevant to your graveyard. That way you can cast it later on. Do keep in mind your opponents are going to draw and discard off this as well, so they are going to be shaping their hands. If they happen to discard a legendary land or a legendary artifact, though, Lara does have the ability to interact with those. We have Inventor's Fair, which is probably my favorite land in this entire list. This is a legendary land that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. You can tap it for a colorless, or you can pay for tap it and sacrifice it. Search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts, and since this is a legendary land, we can, of course, reanimate this later on with Lara, which is really impactful in a deck like this. This is potentially a repeatable tutor. We also have Academy Ruins, which is a legendary land that you can tap to add a colorless. You can pay 1 and a blue and tap it to put target artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library. This will allow you to get a second usage out of some of your non-legendary artifact cards. I guess you can target your legendaries too, but I mean, so long as your commander's in play, you probably don't need to. It does provide that additional value though. Do keep in mind you're putting it on the top of your library, so this is going to ensure that you're going to be drawing that card either on your next draw step, or if you do have a way for you to draw multiple cards over the course of a turn. Continuing to fix up our mana base, we do have all 3 of the check lands for this color combination, so that being Hinterland Harbor, Rootbound Crag, and Sulphur Falls. The way that these lands work is that they say that they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 1 of the 2 basic land types that they specifically care about, and then they can tap for 1 of 2 colors. I also have all 3 of our Pain lands included in this being Carplusian Forest, Shivan Reef, and Yavimaya Coast. Each of these lands can tap for a colorless, or you can tap them to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana to your mana pool, but if you do, it'll deal 1 damage to you. And we have all 3 of the bond lands here. We have Rejuvenating Springs, Spire Garden, and Training Center. The way that these cards work is that they state whenever they enter the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. They can also each tap for 1 of 2 different colors. So it helps to fix up our mana base a little bit. I do have 2 utility lands here that are sadly not legendaries and don't provide any additional value as far as color production goes, but they can be pretty impactful in a list like this. And if our opponents are playing around with some pesky legendary lands, it's a nice way for us to make sure that we can also play around with those pesky legendary lands. The first one here is Strip Mine. This is a land that you can tap, and it says add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. It also has another ability in which you may tap it, sacrifice Strip Mine, and destroy target land. So this will allow you to blow up one of your opponent's things. We also have Wasteland here. This is a land that you can tap for a colorless, or you can tap it, sacrifice Wasteland, and destroy target non-basic land. So same kind of thing with Strip Mine. It does have the non-basic land clause. Ultimately, you don't care about the basic lands. Chances are you're probably not going to be blowing up your opponent's forest because, well, you don't actually have the ability to do anything with that. So not very relevant there. Lastly, to go ahead and wrap this one up, we're going to move on to the basics. This deck includes 6 basic forests, 6 basic islands, and 5 basic mountains to help round things out. Now, this deck is a little bit interesting whenever it comes to the mana base, in that it is actually a little bit lighter on the green side. However, I did want to make sure I included a critical number of 6 forests. A lot of our land ramping cards, so things like Nature's Lore or Rampant Growth, specifically require that green. And then once we go ahead and get that forest in play initially to be able to cast those, we should be able to smooth out our mana base from there. Overall, this deck is going to come in currently at $343.70 as at least of the time of this recording. I do think that Lara Croft is quite a bit of fun. Realistically speaking, however, I am going to go ahead and throw in a little bit of a disclaimer here. I think that this is a deck that really benefits from actually living outside of this $350 budget. That's where I like to build most of my decks at, but in this case, I felt like it kind of actually limited what I could do with this. The Kamigawa lands, for example, Boseiju and Otawara, are both fantastic lands that I really wanted to include here. You're able to channel them to take advantage of their ability and to be able to actually get them back as lands later on. However, those cards are pretty pricey. Boseiju's currently going for about $40, so I couldn't justify including them in this list. There were a couple of other lands that I had my eye on that were kind of the same price range. So Lara Croft, I do think is quite a bit of fun. If you are somebody who is interested in playing with a deck like this, maybe if you don't happen to have a budget, you can always include those. If not, though, I do think this deck performs in a pretty good way as it currently is, at least as how I've currently built it. Do me a huge favor, though. Make sure that you leave some comments down below. What do you like about this deck, or what changes would you suggest that we make to it? As always, we love all the support that we get from you guys. Please make sure that you subscribe to this channel and you like this video if you haven't done so already. Follow us on our other social media platforms. We are on Instagram, we are on Twitter, and we are also on TikTok, where we've been pumping out a ton of really good content on that actually lately as well. Make sure you you check out our countdown for the best precons of 2023. If you do want to support us even more than that, though, we do actually also have a Patreon. We're going to go ahead and link that down below. And if you wanted to check this deck list out on Moxfield, we've got the link for that one down there, too. Sorry, this is a heck of an outro, but thank you so much for bearing with me. Once again, this has been Guys at Magic, and we love all the support that we get from everybody here. So until next time, peace.